Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Harry, Ron, and Hermione broke the rules more often than Filch could grumble. And we're not talking about skipping class or sneaking snacks under the stairs. No, we're talking serious infractions, the kind that would get any other student kicked out of Hogwarts faster than you can say Expelliarmus. Today, let's revisit moments that should have ended with them being expelled. Enjoy the video! Number 1. Map in hand and off to Hogsmeade. Third-year students are finally allowed to visit Hogsmeade with signed permission from a parent. But Harry? No chance. The Dursleys wouldn't sign a napkin, let alone a form. So what does he do? He whips out the Marauder's map and that classic Potter ingenuity and sneaks into the village unseen. The result? Zero punishment, just approving nods from Fred and George. Number 2. Underground Society, Dumbledore's Army. When Umbridge banned spellwork in defense against the dark arts, Hermione had an idea. Let's teach ourselves, and who better to lead than Harry? Thus Dumbledore's Army was born. Secret meetings, real magic, and total defiance of school and ministry orders. Technically, a major offence. In reality, pretty much shrugged off. Number 3. Flying a car to school. So what do Harry and Ron do when they miss the train to Hogwarts? They steal an enchanted flying car and cruise across the sky like it's no big deal. They crash into the Whomping Willow, scare a bunch of muggles, and nearly wreck the car. Consequences? A lecture, expulsion, not even on the table. Number 4. Disarming a teacher. Snape was never exactly their favourite. But hitting a professor with a triple Expelliarmus and knocking him out cold, that's not rebellion, that's full-on assault. At any normal school, they'd be gone by lunch. At Hogwarts, no one even mentions detention. Number 5. Midnight strolls under an invisibility cloak. Hogwarts at night? Creepy and full of rules. But our trio loved to roam. The library, Hagrid's hut, secret passages, always under Harry's cloak. Breaking curfew, sneaking into forbidden zones? Absolutely. But did anyone stop them? Not really. Number 6. Stealing thestrals and flying to the ministry. After Harry's vision of Sirius in danger, he didn't ask Dumbledore for help. Nope. He and the gang stole a bunch of thestrals and flew straight into central London. These creatures weren't supposed to leave school grounds, let alone carry kids to a government building. But again, no arrests, no consequences, kept just another "you saved the world" moment. Number 7. Wandering into the Forbidden Forest. Unauthorized. The Chamber of Secrets is open, students are being petrified, and our duo suspects the truth lies in the Forbidden Forest. So naturally they march straight into the spider-infested depths, with zero permission and zero adult supervision. A visit to Aragog? Brave. Also extremely reckless. But did the headmaster say a word? Not one. Number 8. Dragon smuggling mission. Hagrid raising a dragon? Already illegal. But when Norbert becomes too much, Harry and Hermione launch a nighttime operation to smuggle him out of the castle. They sneak through Hogwarts with a dragon in tow and hand him off to Charlie's friends. Impressive, sure, but also a direct violation of magical creature laws. And yet, no repercussions. Number 9. Polyjuice potion and undercover work. To find out who's behind the attacks at school, the trio decides to brew Polyjuice potion using ingredients stolen from Snape's private stash. They lie to Lockhart, sneak into the restricted section, and transform into Slytherins to spy on Draco. It's a full-on espionage mission worthy of auras. But since it's the Golden Trio, once again, no real punishment. Number 10. Finale, breaking into the third-floor corridor. Remember Dumbledore's warning. Anyone who doesn't wish to die a most painful death should avoid the third-floor corridor. Guess what Harry and his friends do? They ignore it completely and barge right in, past a three-headed dog, through magical traps, potions and giant chess games, all to stop Voldemort. The goal, noble. The method, completely reckless and absolutely forbidden. Number 11. Using the Time Turner to save Sirius and Buckbeak. The Time Turner was meant for academics. Hermione used it to attend multiple classes at once. Potions at 9, arithmancy at 10, all without breaking a sweat. Professor McGonagall had given it to her under strict conditions. You must not be seen, she warned. You must not change anything. But rules faded the night Sirius Black was sentenced to the Dementor's kiss. No trial, no defense, just death. Dumbledore never gave an order, only a hint. "You know, Miss Granger, 3 turns should do it," he said softly. It was enough. Hermione understood, so did Harry. They spun the time-turner and stepped into the past. What followed was heroic. They saved Buckbeak, they freed Sirius. They stood in the shadows of their past selves, dodging disaster with every step. But make no mistake, they interfered with time. They changed the outcome of a government execution. They rewrote hours of history. No approval, no oversight. Just 2 13-year-olds rewriting fate. Time travel is among the most dangerous branches of magic. Ministry laws forbid it without permission. One wrong move, and entire timelines collapse. But at Hogwarts, no punishment, no questions, just quiet nods and knowing smiles. Once again, the trio shattered the rules and walked away untouched. Number 12. Spying on Malfoy with forbidden magic. Harry was convinced Draco Malfoy was hiding something. Not just schoolboy secrets, but something darker, something dangerous. "He's a Death Eater," Harry insisted again and again. No one believed him, not Hermione, not even Ron. So Harry decided to prove it, alone, if necessary. He used everything he had, the invisibility cloak, the Marauder's map. He lurked in corridors and corners, following Malfoy from class to class. He cast Muffliato to block out eavesdroppers and used extendable ears to catch snippets of private conversations. "I saw him going into the room of requirement," Harry whispered. "He's doing something in there." Ginny helped. Once, she distracted Malfoy in the hallway so Harry could sneak behind him. It wasn't an official plan. It wasn't fair. It was a setup. They used trickery, silence, and spells, all against another student. No teacher was informed. No adult was consulted. Hermione warned, "This is dangerous, Harry." But he didn't stop. In another school, it would have been suspension, maybe worse, stalking, magical spying, coordinated deception. At Hogwarts, just another page in the story. Malfoy was guilty, yes, but that didn't erase how far Harry went. The ends justified the means, and no one ever told him otherwise. Number 13, sneaking into the Ministry of Magic in school uniform. Harry saw it in his mind. Sirius screaming, tortured by Voldemort in the Department of Mysteries. The vision was too vivid, too real. He didn't question it. He didn't go to McGonagall. Dumbledore was out of reach. Instead, he turned to Ron, Hermione, Neville, Ginny and Luna. "We have to go," he said. And they went. They broke out of Hogwarts using thestrals. No plan, no backup. Just 6 students flying into the heart of the Ministry of Magic. In school robes, no adult permission, no clearance. They tricked their way inside and stepped into the Department of Mysteries, where the air shimmered with secrets. What started as a rescue turned into an ambush. Death Eaters were waiting. Bellatrix Lestrange led the charge. Spells flew like daggers. Ron was nearly swallowed by a brain in a jar. Hermione was hit and collapsed, unconscious. Neville's nose broke, and he still stood to fight. It was children against killers. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry remembers the chaos. He had never known pain like this. But still he stood, wand raised. Sirius died. That was the price. Not an expulsion, not detention, no letters home. The Ministry didn't charge them. Hogwarts didn't punish them. They returned with wounds and grief, but no consequences, just silence. And the understanding that in their world, even children were expected to fight. Number 14, using forbidden magic during defense against the dark arts lessons. Dolores Umbridge ruled her classroom with pink lace and an iron wand. "You're not to use magic," she declared. "There will be no need." Defense against the dark arts became theory, recitation, and fear. Wands stayed on desks. Spells were forbidden. But fear was not enough to silence Harry Potter. In secret, the trio built an army. The room of requirement became their battleground. Dusty cushions turned into dueling arenas. Neville practiced Expelliarmus with clenched fists. Hermione taught Protego with deadly precision. Harry stood at the front, commanding attention. Every great wizard in history started out as nothing more than what we are now, he told them. And they believed him. They broke every rule in Umbridge's book. They cast Stupefy, Reducto, and even Petrificus Totalis on each other, laughing and shouting as sparks filled the air. They called it Dumbledore's army. It was war training, plain and simple. And it was illegal, organized, unauthorized, and dangerous. In any normal school they would have been expelled, maybe even questioned by the ministry. But at Hogwarts, under siege from within, rebellion was survival. Harry wasn't punished, he was applauded. Because when justice fails, even forbidden magic starts to look like courage. Number 15, skipping classes for personal investigations. Class schedules were more of a suggestion for Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Whenever danger stirred at Hogwarts, lessons became background noise. Hermione still managed to finish essays and memorize potion ingredients. But Harry and Ron? They vanished from Transfiguration or Charms as if their lives depended on it, and sometimes they believed it did. During their 6th year, they became obsessed with the mystery of the Half-Blood Prince. Instead of attending astronomy, they slipped into the restricted section, combing through books for anything about dark magic and Horcruxes. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Ron once asked, "Aren't we supposed to be in herbology?" Harry replied without blinking, "This is more important." No one stopped them. No one asked. Snape became another point of obsession. Harry tracked his movements, eavesdropped in corridors, and even skipped meals to follow him. The teachers, oddly silent, never handed out detentions for missed classes. It was as if they understood, or feared, that interrupting the trio might do more harm than good. In any normal school, this pattern would end with letters home and suspension. At Hogwarts, it became routine. Investigating ancient magic, spying on staff, uncovering Voldemort's secrets, all during school hours. And the strangest part? No one ever said, "Get back to class," because when Harry Potter walked out the door, something in the castle always shifted. Number 16. Illegal access to Slughorn's memory in his office. Slughorn's memory was a locked box, and Dumbledore handed Harry the key. Except the key didn't exist. "You have to get that memory, Harry," the headmaster had said, his voice firm but tired. The memory in question was not just a recollection. It held the secret to Voldemort's immortality, but Horace Slughorn wasn't ready to share. Guilt haunted him. He had once told a teenage Tom Riddle how a soul could be split. Harry tried the honest way. Questions. Please, nothing worked. Slughorn smiled, dodged, and slammed shut the door of his mind. So Harry turned to Felix Felicis, a shimmering potion of pure, liquid luck. He poured it down his throat, felt courage bloom, and wandered straight into the professor's greenhouse. What followed was not a forceful interrogation, but a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Harry didn't demand the memory. He danced around it. "You'd be giving Dumbledore what he wants," he said, his tone casual, almost playful. Slughorn cracked, not because he was threatened, but because Harry made him believe it was the right thing to do. The memory was pulled from his temple and dropped into the pensieve like a thread of light. But what happened that night was ethically murky. Harry used magic, even if indirectly, to bypass Slughorn's will. He didn't tell him about the potion. He nudged, he twisted, he got what he needed. In any other school, in any other world, that would have been a violation. A student charming a teacher into giving up personal, shameful memories, grounds for dismissal. But this was Hogwarts, and Harry Potter was no ordinary student. He bent the rules, and once again, the rules bent with him. Number 17. Secretly eavesdropping with the two-way mirror. The mirror glinted in the light, tucked away at the bottom of Harry's trunk, a gift from Sirius Black, meant for private communication across distance. It was simple in appearance, square and worn at the edges, but in a world where secrets could decide who lived and who didn't, the mirror was more than a trinket. It was a window, a spyglass, a temptation. After Dumbledore's death, paranoia hung over Hogwarts like a storm cloud. Harry's suspicions deepened. Was Snape truly loyal? What was Malfoy doing vanishing from the Marauders' map? And most importantly, was anyone watching? When traditional means failed, Harry turned again to the two-way mirror. Not to call for help, not to check on Sirius. Sirius was gone. Instead, he pressed his face to the glass, whispering into it, hoping to see beyond the veil of the school's walls. He wanted to know, to listen, to spy. What began as an innocent communication tool slowly became something else. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the mirror had been introduced with purpose. "Use it if you need me," Sirius had said, but Harry didn't use it in time. Sirius died. In the 6th year, Harry kept the shattered shard hidden, desperate for it to give him something. And once it did. When he thought he saw Dumbledore's eye looking back at him, he was sure he had found a way to observe the world in secret. He watched, he waited, he crossed a line. If any other student had a magical object capable of eavesdropping on staff or infiltrating private spaces, the consequences would have been swift: detention, confiscation, suspension. But Harry was trusted, or rather, he was feared. He had faced Voldemort, and perhaps that made the teachers blind to the fact that even heroes can misuse power. Number 18, Operation Free the House Elf. It started, as many things did at Hogwarts, in the quiet corners of the Gryffindor common room. Hermione Granger, bushy-haired, and always a little breathless from thought, was reading Holidays with Hags when her eyes landed on a footnote about the servitude of house elves. That was the spark. By the time the Triwizard Tournament was announced in their 4th year, Hermione had already begun drafting pamphlets for her latest obsession, SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. But what began as an idealistic mission soon turned into something bolder and more dangerous. A covert operation, a violation of magical law, a rebellion wrapped in knitted hats. The students at Hogwarts never took SPEW seriously. Even Ron laughed. "You've got to be joking," he scoffed when she handed him a badge. "Next, you'll be knitting them socks and smuggling them under their pillows." She did exactly that. Her fingers became blistered from constant knitting. Tiny hats, mittens, scarves. She left them scattered around the Gryffindor common room and hidden in the laundry baskets, hoping some elf would find one, pick it up, and be freed. She never asked if they wanted freedom. She believed they needed it. Hermione had not forgotten Dobby, the trembling house elf who once shattered a pudding in Privet Drive to warn Harry of danger. His freedom, granted unintentionally by Lucius Malfoy after Harry tricked him into giving Dobby a sock, had transformed him. Dobby wore mismatched clothes with pride, worked at Hogwarts for pay, and spoke with a conviction that made Hermione weep. "Dobby is a free elf," he would squeak, eyes bulging with defiance. Hermione saw in him the proof of her beliefs, but Dobby was the exception, not the rule. Most house elves did not want freedom. Winky, once the devoted servant of Barty Crouch Sr., was dismissed when she failed to control the behavior of his deranged son. Winky's response was not gratitude for liberty, but grief. She drank butterbeer to dull her misery and sobbed in the Hogwarts kitchens. "Winky is a good elf," she moaned to anyone who would listen. "Winky does not want clothes." Hermione ignored this, insisting that Winky would one day thank her. But where was the line between help and imposition? The rebellion took shape in whispers. Hermione, unnoticed by professors, snuck into the kitchens regularly, stuffing hats into laundry baskets under the pretense of bringing Dobby treats. Dobby, now an ally, helped distribute them. Other elves, however, refused to touch the garments. "They think Hermione is insulting them," Dobby told Harry, ringing his ears. "They is throwing the hats away, sir. They is calling them rubbish." But Hermione didn't stop. She began hiding clothing in more subtle ways, folding them into the sheets, slipping gloves into pillowcases. It wasn't just passive resistance from the elves. Creature, the ancient and surly elf of the Black family, muttered curses at Hermione under his breath. "Filthy mudblood thinks she can ruin ancient ways," he hissed when no one listened. Even Professor McGonagall raised an eyebrow when Hermione launched into one of her impassioned speeches. "Miss Granger," she said dryly during a transfiguration lesson, "I suggest you refrain from liberating the staff without their consent." Still, no official reprimands came. That was the strange part. Hogwarts, with all its rules, never punished Hermione for essentially interfering with the employment contracts of magical beings. Had a student tampered with a centaur herd or rehomed a hippogriff, there would have been an inquiry. But the house elves, those silent, unseen workers, remained a grey area. Perhaps the school board didn't consider them important enough to provoke a scandal, or perhaps Dumbledore himself turned a blind eye, amused by Hermione's crusade. But the line was crossed during the Yule Ball preparations. As students danced in enchanted robes and snowflakes sparkled in the air, Hermione made her most daring move. She had learned that several elves would be working backstage, serving punch and polishing silver. That night, she left an entire basket of finely knit socks in the coat room, hoping some would be taken. She enlisted Luna Lovegood to help her sneak the basket past Filch. "They'll need warmth," Hermione explained. "Elves aren't immune to cold." Luna, dreamy-eyed as ever, simply nodded and said, "I expect Nargles will try to steal them." What Hermione didn't expect was that one elf, a young female named Trilly, actually picked up a sock, not out of desire for freedom, but to return it to the lost and found. When she realized what it was, she dropped it in horror, but the magic was done. She was free. "I didn't mean to," Trilly wailed. "Please, I belongs to Hogwarts." Hermione was overjoyed. "Don't worry," she said. "You're safe now." But Trilly was not safe. She was homeless. The kitchens erupted in fury. The other elves demanded that Hermione leave. "She is ruining everything," one shouted. "We is proud to serve. We is not slaves." Even Dobby looked troubled. "Hermione Granger is kind," he said, "but she does not always listen." The fallout was swift. Trilly vanished. Some said she tried to get a job at St. Mungo's. Others whispered that she went to Knockturn Alley, where free elves sometimes begged for food. Hermione never found out. Harry and Ron confronted her in the library days later. "You can't just free them like that," Ron argued. "It's not your decision." Hermione snapped. "Of course it is. They're oppressed. Someone has to act." But her voice trembled. She knew something had gone wrong. The mission that began with noble intentions had left at least one elf destitute, and others deeply upset. And yet nothing happened to Hermione. No detention, no letter home, just silence. Was it favoritism? Perhaps. The Golden Trio often escaped consequences. After all, they had broken into the Ministry, flown illegal vehicles, and brewed Polyjuice Potion in the second-floor girls' bathroom. But this time, it wasn't just school rules they bent. It was the delicate, ancient bond between species. House elves were bound by magic older than the Ministry itself. "They serve because they want to," Dumbledore once said gently, "but we must always treat them with kindness." Hermione thought she was doing just that. The elves disagreed. Number 19, interfering with the Triwizard Tournament. In the dim candlelight of the Gryffindor common room, long after curfew had fallen and the fire had burned down to a faint glow, 3 students sat huddled over a pile of books. One of them, with a wild mop of black hair and lightning bolt scar, was staring blankly at the pages. The other 2, one red-haired and anxious, the other brown-haired and determined, were plotting. Not for a prank, not for a party, but for survival. Harry Potter never asked to be the 4th champion in the Triwizard Tournament. The Goblet of Fire had spoken, but the choice wasn't his. And yet there he was, just 14, thrust into a deadly game where dragons, mermaids, and riddles weren't the worst of his problems. The real challenge? Surviving a tournament that was never meant for him. And he wasn't alone in the fight. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, his inseparable allies, quickly realized that the only way to keep Harry alive was to break every rule that Hogwarts had laid before them. "We've got to help him," Hermione whispered one night, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Even if it means bending the rules." Bending was putting it lightly. Take the first task. The champions were to face dragons, real fire-breathing dragons, the kind that could incinerate a student in a second. Harry, unaware of the task until Hagrid slipped up and took him for a midnight stroll past the enclosures, had no preparation, no advantage, unlike his rivals. Fleur Delacour, Victor Crumb, and Cedric Diggory were older, stronger, and trained. Harry had nothing except for Hermione's brilliance. It was Hermione who spent hours combing through books for spells that might help. One evening she thrust a heavy tome in front of him. "This one," she said, her eyes alight with urgency. "The summoning charm, Actio. If you can master it, you can summon your broomstick. You're a great flyer, Harry. Use that." It wasn't part of the curriculum. It was advanced magic, beyond what fourth years were supposed to know, but that didn't stop them. "Accio Firebolt!" Harry shouted in the arena, wand raised high. The crowd held its breath. For a terrifying second, nothing. Then, with a roar of wind and triumph, his broomstick came hurtling through the sky and into his grip. "He's got it!" Bagman cried from the commentator's box. The audience erupted. No one questioned where a fourth year had learned such a powerful charm. No one, except maybe Professor Snape. And yet, even before that spell was perfected, the trio had already bent the rules to make it happen. They practiced in hidden corridors, skipped meals, lied about their whereabouts. Hermione, ever the perfect student, snuck into the restricted section using a stolen password. "It's for Harry," she told Ron, who only nodded in agreement. Loyalty trumped legality. Ron's role was more subtle, but no less critical. After their early falling out, the reconciliation between the two boys brought a wave of relief. Ron began feeding Harry every scrap of information he could gather from older students, and eavesdropped conversations. "Crumb's practicing something underwater," Ron said one night, passing Harry a scribbled note. "He's been sneaking into the lake after dark." The second task loomed, and once again Harry was at a disadvantage. No idea what was coming. No clue how to breathe underwater for a full hour. It was Dobby, bless him, who brought the gillyweed. But it was Hermione who had first identified the need. "It's got to be something in the water," she mused, after hearing the golden eggs clue. "Mermaids, under the lake. We have to find a way for you to breathe underwater." That meant rule-breaking, stealing ingredients, sneaking into greenhouses and bribing Peeves to distract Filch. And when that wasn't enough, Hermione brought out the illegal books again. "There's a potion that allows temporary gill growth," she whispered, thumbing through a battered volume titled Water Magic, Submerged Sorcery and Survival. "But we'll need lacewing flies and belladonna. Potions ingredients not readily available to fourth years." It was dangerous. It was forbidden. It was necessary. In the days leading to the task, their desperation grew. "We can't let him drown," Hermione said firmly. "We won't." And so they worked through the night. Every charm, every whisper in the library, every rule they broke, it was for Harry. Then came the third task, the maze, and with it, more subterfuge. At this point, the professors were on edge, the ministry suspicious, and tensions ran high. But that didn't stop the trio. "Something's off," Ron muttered. "Moody's acting strange." They were right, of course, but no one knew yet that Barty Crouch Jr. was impersonating Alastor Moody using Polyjuice Potion and dark intentions. Harry's friends couldn't enter the maze, but they could prepare him. Hermione created a cheat sheet of defensive spells, Stupefy, Impedimenta, Reducto, all spells technically approved but not allowed to be rehearsed for tournament advantage. They practiced late at night. "Concentrate," Hermione barked. "Again, Reducto!" The ground beneath them shook with Harry's blast. Good. Again. They weren't helping a champion win, they were helping a friend survive. There's a difference. Even Fred and George got involved, slipping Harry some extendable ears to gather intelligence from the judges' table. "Just don't let Mum find out," George winked. "She'll have kittens." And then there were the clandestine meetings. One particularly daring night, Hermione tricked the suits of armour to stand guard while she, Ron, and Harry snuck into the trophy room to examine past champions' records, looking for patterns. "They want you to think it's all fair," Ron scoffed. "But there's always something rigged." It wasn't just about strategy. It was about information. Cedric shared a tip with Harry before the second task. In return, Harry warned Cedric about the dragons. "Take a bath," Harry told him cryptically about the egg clue. Dumbledore noticed. So did McGonagall. But no one intervened. Everyone, it seemed, was letting things slide, for better or worse. Number 20. Breaking into Umbridge's office. It all began with a flickering fireplace and a desperate need for communication. Hogwarts, in the grip of Dolores Umbridge's iron rule, had become a fortress of silence and fear. As the newly appointed High Inquisitor, Umbridge had not only rewritten the rules of the school, but had effectively isolated it from the outside world. Owls were intercepted, letters opened, flu connections cut off. No student could reach their family or the Order of the Phoenix. It was as if a veil had fallen over the castle, and for Harry, Ron, and Hermione, that meant war. Harry had been yearning to speak to Sirius Black, his godfather, whose guidance had become more vital than ever. The situation at school was deteriorating by the day. Educational decree after educational decree had been nailed to the Great Hall's walls like manifestos of a rising tyranny. Detentions had turned cruel, and students who spoke up were silenced with punishments that left scars, some visible, like the words etched into Harry's hand, "I must not tell lies." But communication wasn't just a wish, it was a necessity. Dumbledore had vanished, the Order was underground, and Harry needed answers. "We have to talk to Sirius," Hermione said one evening, her eyes dark with resolve. "We're flying blind. She's cutting us off from everyone who can help. We can't just sit here." That's when the plan was born. Hermione, the mastermind, suggested using the only flu connection in the entire school that still worked, Umbridge's fireplace. It was the only one not under ministry restriction, connected directly to the network. But to use it, they would have to break into the most heavily protected office in the castle. Ron had blanched at the thought. "You mean her office? The one guarded by blood-quill contracts and exploding teacups?" "Yes," Hermione said. "That one." The operation required precision, timing, nerve. They couldn't afford a single misstep. Umbridge was known to be fanatically meticulous. Her office was a grotesque shrine to kittens and pink lace, but beneath that sugary surface lay cruel enchantments and surveillance charms that even the Weasley twins respected. Fred had once whispered to Ginny, "I think she's got a spell that listens through walls. I swear my nose tingled when I mentioned dung bombs." Their first step was gathering intelligence. Over several days, Hermione and Ron began observing Umbridge's schedule. She was frighteningly regular in her movements, breakfast, inspections, detentions. She left her office precisely at 4:15 every afternoon for a 5-minute tea break in the staff room. That was their window. 5 minutes, no more. Harry would be the one to enter. He had the quickest reflexes. Hermione would keep watching the corridor with her enchanted coins to signal Ron, who would stand near the corridor's bend as backup. Crookshanks was recruited too, to trip the inquisitorial squad should they appear. Every piece mattered. On the day of the operation, tension wrapped around them like a suffocating cloak. Harry's heart was pounding as he approached the door. He had a single goal: use the fireplace and get a message to Grimmauld Place. "You'll only have seconds," Hermione reminded him, pressing a tiny bottle into his palm. "This is Peruvian instant darkness powder. If she walks in, use it and run." The door to Umbridge's office creaked open with a sound like a dying mouse. Inside, the room was stifling. Plates of purring kittens lined the walls, their eyes following him with eerie awareness. Draped every surface, and the scent of sickly sweet tea hung heavy in the air. But Harry moved fast. He knelt before the fireplace and threw in the flu powder Hermione had stolen from Filch's office. "Number 12, Grimmauld Place," he hissed. Green flames burst forth. He thrust his head into the hearth, and the world shifted. It was like flying through a tunnel of wind and ash. Moments later, the flickering image of the Black family's drawing room emerged, and there, thank Merlin, was Sirius, lounging in an armchair with a butterbeer. "Harry," Sirius blinked. "What the? Where are you?" "Umbridge's office," Harry said quickly. "We don't have long. We need to know what's going on. We're completely cut off." Sirius's expression darkened. "She's trying to isolate Dumbledore's supporters. Fudge is terrified of him. That's why they're monitoring everything. But you've got to be careful. She's more dangerous than you think. There are rumors she's using Veritaserum on students." Harry barely had time to process that when a shrill, unmistakable voice pierced the air behind him. "What are you doing?" It was Umbridge. Harry jerked his head out of the fire. She stood in the doorway, her wand already raised, her face contorted with rage. "You horrible, insolent boy!" she shrieked. "Interfering with ministry property! You will be punished for this!" "Run!" Hermione's voice echoed down the corridor. Harry didn't think. He threw the black powder to the ground. Instantly, the room plunged into a swirling night of shadows. The kittens wailed. Umbridge screamed. Harry bolted through the door, bumping into Ron, who pulled him toward the stairs. Behind them, chaos exploded. Alarms wailed like banshees. The floor trembled beneath their feet. They didn't stop running until they were hidden behind a tapestry near the fourth-floor corridor. Breathing hard, Ron looked at Harry and whispered, "That was mental." But they had done it. For that brief moment, they had broken the seal. Contact had been made. The Order would know what was happening. They weren't alone. The consequences were swift. Umbridge doubled down on security. The Inquisitorial squad, led by Draco Malfoy, prowled the corridors like wolves. "Potter will slip again," Malfoy bragged. "He always does." Harry received another week of detentions, sitting for hours with the blood quill cutting into his skin. But for all her rage, Umbridge couldn't prove he had used her fireplace. She knew, but she had no evidence, and without evidence, she was powerless to act. The entire ordeal became one of the most whispered-about events in the school. Students passed it around in hushed voices. Some called it reckless, others heroic. But one thing was certain. It was the moment the resistance turned from whispers into action. Number 21 using the Half-Blood Prince's book. The room smelled of old parchment and dust. Somewhere deep in the dungeons of Hogwarts, among forgotten cauldrons and unused shelves, a single book waited patiently. It was worn, scarred by ink stains and time, its spine nearly broken, and it would change everything for Harry Potter. It began innocently enough. Professor Slughorn, returning from retirement, had no idea he was setting the stage for something dangerous. He handed out battered textbooks for advanced potion-making, and Harry's copy, seemingly no different from the rest, bore the curious inscription, "This book is the property of the Half-Blood Prince." That was the beginning. The first surprise came quickly. While Hermione followed the printed instructions to the letter, Harry noticed handwritten notes scribbled in the margins of his book. The prince had improved every recipe, and not just marginally. His alterations to the draft of Living Death, for instance, gave Harry a flawless, silky black potion that earned him Slughorn's rare praise. "Perfect, my boy, perfect." Hermione, for once, was not pleased. She eyed the book with suspicion. "You don't know who that person is," she warned. "You're taking advice from a complete stranger." But for Harry, the results spoke louder than caution. Every page was a treasure chest, counter-jinxes, shortcut techniques, and even spells never taught at Hogwarts. One such entry simply read, "Levicorpus, nonverbal, hoist 'em by the ankle." And sure enough, it worked. But this wasn't just about academic success. The book whispered secrets, it offered power. For a 16-year-old boy scarred by war and death, that power was irresistible. When Harry used the prince's tricks, he felt something different, something immediate and effective. He even began trusting the prince more than his own professors. Then came Sectum Sempra. It was tucked halfway into a page, squeezed between instructions for a strengthening potion and a doodle of a hexed eyeball. For enemies, the note said, nothing more. Harry tried it in private once, on a stack of cushions. Nothing happened. He shrugged it off until the day Draco Malfoy cornered him in the bathroom. The confrontation was inevitable. Tensions between them had been escalating for weeks. Draco, secretive and pale, haunted the castle like a ghost, nursing a deadly mission from Voldemort himself. Harry, convinced that Draco had become a Death Eater, was desperate to prove it. When they finally clashed, wands drawn, the rage boiled over. Harry didn't think. He reacted. Sectum Sempra. The effect was instant and horrifying. Draco was thrown back, blood erupting from invisible wounds. The pristine tiles of the boys' bathroom were painted red. Moaning myrtles screamed. It was not a stunning spell, it was an attack spell, and it cut deep. Harry stood frozen, watching his enemy bleed out. He hadn't known what the spell truly did, but the book had. Snape rushed in, summoned by Myrtle's cries. He knelt beside Draco, muttering counter-curses, his face tight with fury. "What have you done?" he hissed. When the blood stopped, Draco was alive, but barely. Harry's punishment was swift. Detention for every Saturday until the end of term. The prince's book was confiscated. But what did the punishment really mean? Harry had used an unapproved, illegal spell from an unsanctioned source. The school had no record of Sectum Sempra. It wasn't in the curriculum. It wasn't in any textbook on the library shelves. And yet it had found its way into Hogwarts through that cursed book. It raised troubling questions. How many other dangerous spells were buried in its pages? How many other students could have been harmed? Even more troubling was Dumbledore's reaction, or lack thereof. The headmaster, whose eyes missed very little, never publicly addressed the incident. He never asked where Harry had learned the spell. In fact, he never mentioned the Half-Blood Prince at all. Perhaps he already knew. As it turned out, he did. The book and all its contents had once belonged to Severus Snape. The reveal came late, almost anticlimactic, but earth-shattering in implication. Snape, the potions master, the supposed traitor, the man Dumbledore trusted most, had been the prince. Born to a Muggle father, Tobias Snape, and a witch mother, Eileen Prince, Severus had chosen to call himself the Half-Blood Prince. It was a name born of pain and pride. And his book? It was a diary of brilliance and bitterness, a legacy he left behind without ever meaning to. "You dare use my own spells against me, Potter?" Snape had shouted during their final confrontation. It was personal. It had always been personal, but was the book just a tool, or a symbol of something deeper? It represented, above all, the flaws in Hogwarts' system. Students were taught control, obedience, theory. But real magic, the kind that scars, kills, saves, often came from beyond those walls. Harry had stumbled upon a shadow curriculum, an education in raw power and moral ambiguity. And the school had no answer for it. The prince's book exposed cracks in the foundation. It showed how easily a young wizard, even one as well-intentioned as Harry, could fall into dangerous magic when left unguided. It demonstrated how knowledge, when stripped of accountability, becomes a weapon. And yet, the book had also saved lives. Its improved potion recipes helped Harry win Slughorn's trust that would eventually lead to one of the most crucial memories about Voldemort's Horcruxes. In a way, without the book, the war might have taken a darker turn. This duality is what makes the Half-Blood Prince's book so compelling. It wasn't evil, it wasn't good, it was knowledge, raw and unfiltered. And in the hands of a teenager at war, it became both salvation and sin. Hermione never forgave the book. "It's dangerous, Harry," she repeated even after it was gone. "You shouldn't rely on someone else's work, especially not someone who hides behind a pseudonym." But Hermione, for all her intelligence, believed in the safety of structure. Harry had learned that the world rarely offered that luxury, and perhaps that's what the prince had known too. Snape's annotations were not the scribbles of a madman. They were meticulous, analytical, layered with sarcasm and genius. He wasn't just modifying spells, he was perfecting them. He wasn't just brewing potions, he was reinventing them. The book was the work of a mind who saw beyond rules, beyond teachers, beyond limitations. But it came with a cost. The spell, Sectum Sempra, left more than scars on Draco Malfoy. It left a permanent question mark on Harry's soul. He had used a spell he did not understand. He had nearly killed a peer. And he had done it not with dark intent, but with borrowed power. That, perhaps, is more terrifying than if he had done it on purpose. Later, as the war escalated, Harry often found himself wondering what other spells the prince had left behind, what other secrets the book could have yielded had he kept it. But he didn't. After the bathroom incident, Harry hid the book in the room of requirement, beneath a broken cabinet and a bust of an old wizard. He marked the spot with a tarnished tiara. That tiara, as fate would have it, was a Horcrux. Even in its burial, the book played a part in destiny. In the end, the Half-Blood Prince's book was a mirror. It reflected the user. In Harry's hands, it gave him an edge, but nearly cost him his morality. In Snape's hands, it had once been a refuge, a place to experiment and dream, before the world hardened him into something else. Harry never truly forgave the book. But he never forgot it either, because in those ink-stained pages, he glimpsed the line between guidance and manipulation, between learning and control, between using magic and being used by it, and that perhaps is the most powerful lesson the book ever taught. Number 22. Fleeing the battlefield at the end of 6th year. The night Dumbledore died was not just a tragedy. It was the unravelling of the last thread that held Hogwarts together. In the eerie silence that followed the headmaster's fall from the astronomy tower, panic swirled through the corridors. Even the bravest students, once assured by Dumbledore's presence, now trembled with uncertainty. The Order of the Phoenix had arrived too late, and the dark mark burned above the school, taunting them all. In the chaos, amid shouts and spells, Harry Potter stood frozen, not in fear, but in grim realization. The war had begun in earnest. No one had prepared them for this. Even after surviving the Triwizard Tournament, facing Death Eaters at the Ministry, and witnessing Voldemort's return firsthand, nothing could match the cold finality of Dumbledore's death. He had been their guide, their protector, the one constant in an unravelling world. And now, with his absence, the very air of Hogwarts seemed to shift, colder, darker, empty. When Professor McGonagall attempted to restore order, she expected students to return to their common rooms and prepare for departure. She didn't foresee what Harry, Ron, and Hermione were about to do. "We'll have to tell the others," Hermione whispered, gripping her beaded bag tightly. Ron looked pale, but determined. "This is it, isn't it?" he said. "This is the start." They didn't discuss it with professors. They didn't seek the approval of the Order. They didn't wait for guidance. In their minds, they had already crossed a line. They knew about the Horcruxes, those twisted fragments of Voldemort's soul scattered across the land, and they knew that hunting them was now their responsibility. "It's got to be me," Harry had said before, his voice steady with the weight of prophecy. "I've got to finish what Dumbledore started." That night, after the funeral, the castle was heavy with mourning. Hagrid sobbed uncontrollably, and students wandered the grounds in silence. The trio slipped away like shadows, unnoticed, unsanctioned. No goodbye, no farewell letter, just a silent exodus, a leap into the unknown. From an institutional perspective, what they did was close to insubordination. Hogwarts was still a school under ministry supervision, and students were legally obligated to remain under protection, especially with known threats outside. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked straight into danger, evading security measures that had been tightened since the Ministry's acknowledgement of Voldemort's return. They didn't ask for clearance. They simply vanished. They had no plan, not really. No safe houses beyond the burrow, no connections outside a few Order members, no resources besides Hermione's enchanted bag and Harry's invisibility cloak. And yet they acted. The sheer recklessness of it becomes more apparent the closer you examine it. They were 3 teenagers, barely of age, with no formal training in survival, espionage, or combat strategy. And yet they chose war. What makes this act so jarring isn't just its legality, it's the symbolism. Dumbledore's death marked the end of adult protection. The adults had failed, the Ministry was compromised, Hogwarts breached, and the Order outmaneuvered. In this vacuum, 3 students decided to become warriors. This wasn't a field trip, it was desertion under fire. And still no one stopped them. Their actions went against every protocol. In any other context, they could have been detained. Imagine if another student, say Zacharias Smith or Seamus Finnegan, had attempted to flee the grounds after an attack. Security would have intervened. But this was Harry Potter. Rules bent around him like reeds in a storm. His departure was not only tolerated, it was expected in some unspoken way. Harry's internal reasoning can be traced through his final conversations at Hogwarts. He refused to return the next year. "I'm not coming back, Hermione. I've got to go and find them. I've got to finish it." These weren't idle words. They were a declaration of intent, a farewell to normalcy, a vow to enter the abyss. Their journey began not with triumph, but with secrecy and uncertainty. They knew of only one Horcrux for certain, the locket. And even that knowledge came tainted with failure, as the real locket had already been stolen from the cave. Every clue they had was fragmented, every direction hazy. But that didn't stop them. The choice to leave the castle wasn't just about action, it was about belief. They believed that no one else would do what needed to be done. Hermione's role cannot be understated. She alone carried with her the essentials for survival. She packed the tent, the food, the books, everything. She modified her parents' memories, sent them away, severed ties to the only world she knew. Her commitment went beyond loyalty. It was a sacrifice of identity. She wasn't just a runaway student, she was a soldier in exile. Ron, despite his doubts, chose the path as well. Often overshadowed, often unsure, he made the same leap. He left behind his family knowing they would be targets. He walked into the unknown because of trust. Trust in Harry, trust in Hermione, trust in a cause that hadn't even been fully explained to him. His bravery lies not in blind courage, but in following without knowing where the road led. One could argue that their decision to flee was impulsive, even foolish, but one cannot ignore the magnitude of what they accomplished because of it. Their escape wasn't cowardice, it was a pivot. They didn't run from the battlefield, they ran to the true front line. Their path would lead them to Grimmauld Place, to Ministry infiltration, to camping in forests with fear gnawing at their souls. They would face betrayal, near death, internal fractures. But it began here with this act, this singular moment of rebellion. They chose a mission over safety, chaos over comfort. The symbolic break from Hogwarts was necessary. If they had remained, perhaps more would have died, perhaps the fight would have been delayed. Dumbledore knew this. He had prepared Harry piece by piece. He gave him the memories, the clues, the tools, but the final step, the decision to go, it had to be Harry's. Even in the book, J.K. Rowling draws a sharp contrast between the school's grief and the trio's resolve. Dumbledore would have been happier than anybody to think that there was a little more love in the world, Hermione says at the funeral, and yet that very love drove them to leave. They loved Dumbledore too much to let his mission die with him. The others didn't understand at first. Neville stayed, Luna stayed, Ginny stayed. They would later lead the resistance within Hogwarts, becoming legends in their own right. But they weren't ready to abandon everything, not yet. Harry, Ron, and Hermione didn't wait for the storm to reach the school. They chased it into the wilderness. It is telling that the Ministry never officially labelled them as runaways. They became undesirables, but not because of their departure, because of their defiance. The world they returned to was one of lies, betrayal, and fear. But they had already crossed the threshold. They were no longer students. They were warriors. In some ways, that escape marked the true beginning of their final year, not of schooling, but of purpose. While other students faced carrows and detentions, the trio faced Death Eaters and Dementors. Both sets of battles were real, but the trio's war began with a choice to run not from fear, but into fire. There's something almost biblical about their journey. 3 companions wandering through wilderness, tested by temptation, worn by time, never certain, but always believing. Their bond was forged not in the classroom, but in exile. The Battle of Hogwarts, in the end, was merely the closing act. The real war had begun that night in June. When we look back at that moment, not through the lens of heroism, but through realism, we see 3 children stepping off a cliff, armed only with hope. And that hope became legend. Number 23, using magic outside of school. The summer sun was heavy over Privet Drive the day Harry Potter broke the law, not the ordinary kind like staying up past curfew or sneaking a broomstick from the school shed. No, he shattered one of the most fundamental statutes of the wizarding world, the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, passed in 1875 and etched deeply into the rules every young witch or wizard is expected to follow. But that day, faced with the chilling approach of 2 Dementors in a Muggle alleyway, Harry had no choice. His wand rose almost on instinct. "Expecto Patronum," he cried, and from the tip of his wand burst a silver stag, brilliant as moonlight, galloping toward the creatures of despair. This moment, immortalized in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, is one of the clearest examples of magic used outside school boundaries. Harry was not at Hogwarts, he was not supervised, and yet he had to act. "I was only doing it to save my cousin," he protested later, standing in a sterile ministry courtroom, his voice echoing under the gaze of Cornelius Fudge and a panel of grim-faced officials. "You were expecting Dementors in Little Whinging," Fudge retorted, dripping with disbelief. But even in that sterile courtroom, the truth shimmered brighter than law. Magic, when used in defense, becomes something beyond regulation. The law, in its cold lettering, does not see nuance. According to the statute, any use of magic by an underage wizard or witch outside the grounds of a certified magical institution is prohibited. The penalty is severe: warnings, potential expulsion, and in extreme cases a full trial. And yet magic is not a switch easily turned off. It lives in the young wizard, pulses with them, grows wild and instinctive. This law, while designed for safety, is often in conflict with the very nature of magical adolescence. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets we see another breach, albeit one not of Harry's making. The Ministry, detecting a spell in the vicinity of number 4, Privet Drive, wrongly assumes Harry was the caster of a hover charm used to levitate a pudding, in reality performed by the mischievous house elf Dobby. Harry receives an official warning from Mafalda Hopkirk, a name destined to appear many more times in his tangled relationship with the law. The letter is curt, efficient, and utterly without context. "Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening at 12 minutes past 9. It's a clear indication that the Ministry monitors magic not by wand ownership but by location and presence of underage witches or wizards. The result? A faulty system that punishes innocence. Ron Weasley's run-ins with the law are subtler but no less significant. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, just before the Quidditch World Cup, Arthur Weasley sternly reminds his children, "No magic in front of Muggles!" Yet when the Death Eaters attack the campsite and panic ensues, the children are not only witnesses but participants in a chaotic swirl of defensive spells, disillusionments, and magical retreats. The law disappears in the smoke of danger. Fear, once again, overrides legislation. Hermione Granger, always the voice of rules and order, is not immune to the temptation of casting spells outside sanctioned grounds. In Deathly Hallows, as the trio prepares to leave the burrow, Hermione admits she's already packed an undetectable extension charm on her beaded bag, a feat of impressive and advanced magic. "Oh, come on, Harry," she says, eyes wide with a mix of urgency and pride. "Are you telling me you didn't think we might need a place to store things?" Her logic is impeccable. Her legality? Less so. But in times of war and uncertainty, magic becomes more than a skill. It is a lifeline. One of the most symbolic uses of underage magic occurs in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry inadvertently inflates his Aunt Marge. "She deserved it," he fumes, walking the streets of Little Whinging, dragging his trunk. It is an act of emotional explosion, raw and unintentional. The Ministry, surprisingly, does not expel him. Instead, they send the night bus and shuffle him quietly to Diagon Alley. Underage wizards are allowed a little leeway in times of distress, Fudge later explains, a rare moment of leniency that hints at the Ministry's political motives more than their concern for justice. Fred and George Weasley, the Masters of Mischief, treat the law as a suggestion rather than an order. Their experiments with magical fireworks, portable swamps, and extendable ears begin long before they leave Hogwarts. One can only imagine what kind of unsanctioned spells went off in the backyard at the Burrow during their early years. "You can't expect us to work for the Ministry," George once scoffed. "We're entrepreneurs." Their use of magic outside the classroom is practically a business model, and one that would have landed them in Azkaban had it not been for the sympathetic understanding of their mother and the chaos of war. The hypocrisy of magical law enforcement becomes even more pronounced when we examine the case of Draco Malfoy. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco spends months secretly repairing the Vanishing Cabinet, partaking in highly dangerous magic with deadly intentions. Though technically of age, he operates with full knowledge that what he's doing is illicit. And yet, where is the Ministry, focused on Harry, obsessed with the Chosen One? The machinery of magical justice often spins not toward truth, but toward the politically convenient. The inconsistencies of enforcement further deepen when we consider the Trace, the magical detection system placed on underage witches and wizards. As revealed by Arthur Weasley and later confirmed by Dumbledore, the Trace doesn't track the child, it monitors magic in proximity. So when Hermione repairs Harry's glasses on the Hogwarts Express in Philosopher's Stone, she is technically breaking the law. "Oculus Reparo," she says casually, not realizing she is already treading into forbidden territory. No punishment comes, no owl from the Ministry. The law, as it turns out, bends in silence when not enforced. During the hunt for Horcruxes, underage magic becomes a necessity. Ron disapparates, Hermione casts protective enchantments, and Harry, though technically of age by this point, leads a mission that breaks nearly every rule imaginable. The line between lawful and unlawful magic fades into irrelevance. They are fugitives, rebels against the regime of Dolores Umbridge and a corrupted Ministry. Magic in their hands is not simply a birthright, it is a weapon against tyranny. Yet for all their boldness, the trio is haunted by the consequences of early transgressions. "We could have been expelled," Hermione often whispers in fear, even years into their journey. The fear of the Ministry never quite leaves her. Perhaps that is the true power of the law, not in its enforcement, but in the shadow it casts. Sirius Black, though not underage, is another figure whose magical freedom, or lack thereof, illustrates the tension between the law and justice. Falsely imprisoned, stripped of his wand, denied trial. When he escapes and sends Harry letters by owl, advising him and protecting him, even these acts are technically breaches of law. But as Harry reminds himself, there are some things worth breaking rules for. And then there is Dobby, a free elf who uses magic in the Muggle world, bends space and time, apparates into Hogwarts at will, and yet is largely ignored by the Ministry. The law, it seems, applies strictly to those the Ministry chooses to watch. To be young and human is to be a target. To be magical as non-human is to fall between the cracks. Even Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, once confessed, "Youth cannot know how age thinks and feels, but old men are guilty if they forget what it was to be young." In this, he admits the flaw in the system. The laws of the Ministry are rigid, but children are not. And magic, wild and beautiful, does not obey parchment and ink. Molly Weasley once scolded her children, "No magic!" her voice slicing through the morning bustle of the burrow. But when a storm struck the orchard, it was Arthur who cast the mending charm on the window with young Ginny watching intently. "You'll learn that one soon enough," he told her, winking. Magic in the Weasley household was not just a tool, it was life itself. The law, for all its stern warnings, never truly leaves room for context. Harry, Hermione and Ron were not defiant without cause. Each spell, each enchantment cast outside Hogwarts walls was born from urgency, to protect, to escape, to survive. They broke the law not in rebellion but in necessity, and in doing so they revealed its flaws. Remus Lupin, calm and haunted, once said, "You are not weak, Harry. The Dementors affect you more because there are horrors in your past that the others don't have." The magic Harry used that night in Little Whinging was born not of rule-breaking, but of trauma and strength. To judge it by law alone would be to deny the boy behind the wand. In the end, the story of underage magic is not one of rebellion. It is the story of young people navigating an adult world with limited guidance and boundless danger. Magic is not a crime, misuse is, and sometimes the two are hard to tell apart. The Ministry, for all its power, often fails to understand this, but the children, Harry, Hermione, Ron, understood it all too well. Number 24. Breaking into Gringotts. Even in the dangerous world of wizards, few acts carry as much madness or sheer courage as breaking into Gringotts. The Wizarding Bank was not just a financial institution, it was a fortress protected by goblin-made enchantments, enchanted doors, dragons and curses. It was said to be the most secure place in the magical world, second only to Hogwarts. And yet in a time of rising darkness, when Voldemort's shadow stretched across every inch of Britain, 3 teenagers dared to do the impossible. Harry Potter, Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, names already etched into the story of resistance, chose to infiltrate the Lestrange vault, not for gold nor for fame, but for a Horcrux, one of the final pieces of Lord Voldemort's fractured soul, and the key to defeating him once and for all. But their method of entry was as reckless as it was brilliant. With the help of Polyjuice Potion and the reluctant cooperation of Griphook the Goblin, they disguised Hermione as Bellatrix Lestrange herself. "Don't forget to act like her," Ron muttered as they prepared to enter the bank. Hermione, despite her intelligence and resourcefulness, was shaking. Bellatrix Lestrange was a sadistic killer, loyal to Voldemort and known for her cruel confidence. Hermione, by contrast, was trembling inside Bellatrix's skin, terrified that even a wrong gesture would give them away. "Good morning," she said, shakily to the goblin at the front desk. Her voice was off, too soft. Griphook, walking beside her, hissed under his breath. "Confidence. She would never mumble. She would bark orders." Hermione nodded, swallowed her fear, and straightened her back. "I need to get into my vault," she snapped this time. "Now." The goblins hesitated. Something was clearly wrong. Bellatrix hadn't been seen for weeks, and now she appeared, flanked by an unknown man, Ron, disguised by spell, and a boy hidden under an invisibility cloak. Suspicion was in the air. But protocol demanded they take her to the vault. The Lestrange vault lay deep underground. To reach it, one had to travel by rail, an enchanted cart that raced through the tunnels at terrifying speed. "We're in," Harry whispered. But being inside the tunnels was only the beginning of the nightmare. They passed vaults filled with gold, ancient relics and family secrets. At one point, the cart halted before the thief's downfall, a cascade of enchanted water that neutralized all charms and magical disguises. "We'll be discovered," Hermione hissed. But Griphook had a plan. With a flick of his hand, the cart careened off course. Just before they hit the waterfall, it slammed into the rock wall, throwing them off. In the chaos, they had no choice but to go on foot. They reached the Lestrange vault, its entrance protected by Geminio and Flagrante curses. As soon as they entered, the treasure within began to duplicate and burn. Everything they touched multiplied, smothering them in an avalanche of hot, glowing metal. "There!" Harry shouted. His eyes had locked on the object he had seen in a vision. Helga Hufflepuff's cup. A Horcrux. It was perched atop a high shelf, glimmering with the same malevolent aura as Tom Riddle's diary once had. "It's up there." Ron tried to climb the pile of multiplying goblets, but with every move the treasure doubled and pressed down harder. "I can't reach it!" he shouted. Hermione screamed as a burning chalice pinned her arm. The vault was becoming a death trap. "Use the sword!" Harry yelled. Griphook, seeing his moment, made his move. The goblin snatched the sword of Gryffindor from Harry's grip and leapt out of reach. "You said I could have it," he snarled, "and now it's mine!" With betrayal as thick as the heat in the vault, the trio was left to fend for themselves. Harry lunged, grabbed the cup, and clutched it to his chest as the burning metal engulfed his legs. The pain was searing, but it was done. Outside, the goblins had sounded the alarm. Guards rushed through the tunnels. Spells flew. Griphook vanished into the darkness with the sword. There was no way out until Harry saw it. A dragon. A real, living, breathing dragon. Pale, blind from decades of captivity, its wings shackled, its heart filled with rage, it was chained to guard the lower vaults, and it was their only hope. "We're going to ride it," Harry said. "Ride it!" Ron gasped. "We'll be fried!" But Hermione had already pulled out her wand. "Relatio!" she shouted, and the beast's chains exploded. The dragon reared, roaring, its roar shaking the very rock around them. With no saddle, no plan, and no experience, they scrambled onto its back. The dragon burst through the tunnels, smashing through vault doors, sending goblins fleeing in terror. The trio clung to its spiny back as it rose through the caverns, through the main hall, and finally, gloriously, up through the ceiling itself. Gringotts exploded into the daylight, its marble shattered as the dragon burst free and soared into the sky. Below, goblins screamed, gold rained down like fire. And in the heart of the sky, 3 fugitives clung to a dragon, holding a stolen Horcrux and the hope of the world. It was not an escape, it was a declaration. "This," said Harry, breathless as the wind tore at their faces, "was insane." And it was. It wasn't just rule-breaking, it was international crime. Impersonating a known Death Eater, breaking into a high-security vault, stealing a priceless item, and riding a dragon through Diagon Alley. The kind of crime that would earn you a lifetime sentence in Azkaban. Yet no one who reads this story can truly call them criminals. They did not steal for wealth. They didn't flee for safety. They walked into the jaws of death, literally for the sake of the war, for the sake of defeating Voldemort. Goblins might not forgive them, and truthfully, neither should the Ministry of Magic. But in wartime, morality bends. What matters more, the law or the lives it cannot protect? Griphook's betrayal stung, but in some way it was a lesson. The goblins were not servants of either side. They had been used for generations. The sword of Gryffindor, rightfully goblin-made, was reclaimed with blood and cunning. It wasn't a clean victory. It was compromise in chaos. Later, when recounting the tale, Hermione would whisper, "I thought we would die down there." Ron would joke about riding dragons and holding on for dear life. But Harry would remember the heat of the gold, the rage in the dragon's roar, and the moment he saw the cup, the Horcrux, within his reach. "Gringotts was meant to be impenetrable," he said, "and we shattered it for a cause." The wizarding world may never fully grasp what was done that day. Some still whisper that Harry was reckless, that Hermione betrayed her ethics, that Ron followed blindly. But to those who stood against Voldemort, who fought in the Battle of Hogwarts, who lost family and friends, those actions were the spark before the flame. They didn't break into Gringotts for glory, they broke in to break a soul, and when they did, the war began to turn. Number 25, violating magical creature handling rules. It began, as so many things do at Hogwarts, with a whisper behind closed doors and the flicker of candlelight over ancient stone. The school was under siege from within. Something was petrifying students. and no one could explain how or why. Rumours of the legendary Chamber of Secrets being reopened spread like fiend fire through the halls. Amid the fear and suspicion, 2 second-year students, Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, made a decision that would place them face to face with one of the most dangerous magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest, and in doing so would commit one of the most blatant violations of the Ministry's regulations on magical creature exposure. It was Hagrid, of course. Even when imprisoned in Azkaban under false accusations, his loyalty to Hogwarts and its students burned like dragon fire. The cryptic message he left behind, "Follow the spiders," might have sounded mad to anyone else, but Harry and Ron knew better than to ignore Hagrid's riddles. The simplicity of it carried weight. If Hagrid had managed to leave them a clue, it was important. And so they followed. Into the Forbidden Forest they went, clutching their wands with white-knuckled hands, hearts thudding with each rustle of leaf or snapping twig. The forest, already forbidding by name and reputation, grew darker, thicker, more sinister with every step. "Can we go back now?" Ron muttered, the whites of his eyes visible even in the dim light. But there was no turning back. They were chasing spiders, real ones, marching in a trail like a living river through the underbrush. The Ministry of Magic's guidelines on magical creatures, particularly those deemed Class XXXX or above by the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, are unambiguous. Contact with such beings without direct ministry supervision is strictly prohibited. Acromantulas, giant spiders capable of human speech, bred originally in Borneo, fall squarely into this category. These creatures are not only extremely aggressive, but known to possess no qualms about consuming humans. Approaching them voluntarily is, by ministry definition, an act of reckless endangerment, and yet there stood Harry and Ron deep in the forest, staring into the multi-eyed face of Aragog, the ancient patriarch of the colony. "Go back!" Aragog hissed, his voice like dry leaves scraping over tombstones. "I think not." What followed was a tense conversation that, by all logical reasoning, should have ended in their deaths. But fate, or perhaps a touch of Hagrid's influence, intervened. Aragog, despite his monstrous appearance and carnivorous nature, did not harm them directly. He owed a debt to Hagrid, his keeper, the one human he considered a friend. But that debt did not extend to Hagrid's friends. As soon as Aragog had finished recounting his tale, clearing Hagrid of the murder of Myrtle Warren, the girl who became Moaning Myrtle, he gave the order. "You may feed on them, my children." Harry and Ron barely escaped, saved only by the sudden appearance of the Weasleys' bewitched Ford Anglia, now feral and free-roaming. The severity of this moment cannot be overstated. Harry and Ron knowingly placed themselves in the lair of a creature that the Ministry considers untamable and inherently dangerous. Their actions violated multiple articles within the Ministry's legislation on magical creatures, specifically Article 25, which governs exposure to and interaction with dangerous non-human entities without a proper license or Ministry-approved magical protection. Not only was their entry into the Forbidden Forest unauthorized, but their direct negotiation with a colony of acromantulas was an unthinkable breach of safety protocol. However, as with many transgressions committed by the boy who lived in his close circle, the situation was met not with punishment, but with silence, or worse, implicit approval. The information they extracted from Aragog provided a crucial clue. The monster attacking students was not a spider, but something else entirely. This misdirection allowed Harry to eventually uncover the truth that a basilisk, controlled by the heir of Slytherin, was roaming the castle through the plumbing system. In a legal context, their actions would have warranted intervention by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The misuse of underage magic, trespassing into a restricted area, and unauthorized contact with a highly dangerous species would typically result in hearings, wand confiscations, and possibly even expulsion. Yet none of this came to pass. The urgency of their mission, and perhaps Dumbledore's quiet guardianship, shielded them. It is important to recognize the ethical grey area this represents. On one hand, their bravery and quick thinking helped save the school from catastrophe. On the other, their disregard for magical law sets a troubling precedent. What would have happened if Aragog had not chosen mercy? If the car had not appeared? Hogwarts might have seen 2 more deaths, and the truth behind the chamber could have remained buried for another 50 years. Aragog himself was a being of contradictions. "The girl's body was found in a bathroom," he rasped. "I never saw any part of the castle but the cupboard in which Hagrid kept me." Despite being feared as a monster, he was also a victim, a creature maligned and misunderstood, exiled for a crime he did not commit. His defense of Hagrid was absolute, a testament to the bonds that can form between humans and magical creatures, even those deemed uncontrollable. But the risk was real. Acromantulas are not pets. They cannot be domesticated, and their intelligence only makes them more dangerous. The Forbidden Forest teems with such creatures: thestrals, centaurs, unicorns, werewolves, and others, each governed by a strict set of guidelines. The idea that a pair of second years, barely into adolescence, would walk into that forest and leave alive after confronting the deadliest inhabitant is a miracle and a violation wrapped in one. It raises deeper questions about the role of magical education versus magical regulation. Should Dumbledore have been more vigilant? Should the Ministry have responded more harshly after learning of the incident? Or is there room within magical law for what some would call heroic exceptions? Time and again, Harry and his friends acted outside the bounds of legality, and time and again, they succeeded where the Ministry failed. The moment in the forest is especially poignant because it mirrors the broader arc of the series. Children thrust into danger, navigating complex moral terrain, making choices that adults are either unwilling or unable to make. But that doesn't erase the danger or the rule-breaking. The law exists for a reason. Magical creatures, especially those classified as X, are not to be trifled with. The fact that Ron, of all people, went along despite his debilitating fear of spiders adds a human layer to the story. Why spiders? Why couldn't it be "follow the butterflies," he groans after their escape? His terror, though played for humour, underscores how serious their predicament truly was. Ron didn't want to go. He was terrified every step of the way, but friendship, loyalty, and desperation drove him forward. In the end, their journey to Aragog served 2 purposes. It provided the false lead that eliminated Acromantulas as the monster, and it tested Harry and Ron's courage under life-threatening pressure. But legally and ethically, it was a mess. No official report was filed, no investigation was launched. The car was never retrieved. The forest remained, as always, off-limits in theory and porous in practice. For the reader, it is a thrilling sequence, a classic example of J.K. Rowling's ability to mix danger, humour, and law into a seamless narrative. For a magical lawmaker, it's a nightmare. If all young wizards followed Harry's example, the wizarding world would collapse into chaos. And yet isn't that the core tension of the Harry Potter series? The conflict between rules and doing what's right, between law and justice, between ministry decrees and personal responsibility. Harry's repeated violations are not just acts of rebellion, they are statements, intentional or not, about the failure of institutional oversight in times of crisis. The encounter with Aragog is a case study in magical ethics. Should we judge the action by its intent or by its outcome? Was it right to break the rules if the rules were keeping the truth hidden? Would any adult have dared venture where Harry and Ron did? Years later, after the war, one imagines that Harry, as an aura, would view that night through a different lens. Not with regret, but with awareness. He would understand the risk he took, the line he crossed, the laws he broke, and perhaps, in that understanding, he would be even more vigilant as an enforcer of magical law, because he knows what it means to break it and what it costs. Thus the journey into the Forbidden Forest, though framed as a moment of youthful daring, is one of the clearest examples of how the boundaries of law, morality, and necessity blur in the wizarding world. It reminds us that every heroic act comes with consequences, even if those consequences never make it into the official record. And in the rustle of leaves, the skittering of legs, the hiss of "you may feed on them," we are reminded that magic, for all its wonder, is not without danger, nor are its laws without reason. But sometimes, just sometimes, the spiders must be followed. Number 26. Participating in unauthorized duels. It started not in a classroom but in a hallway, dimly lit, with portraits pretending to sleep and stone walls echoing the breath of two boys filled with pride and challenge. Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy stood 10 feet apart, wands drawn, breaths shallow, as Ron Weasley nervously whispered from the sidelines, "You don't know what he's planning, mate." This wasn't a lesson. There was no professor in sight. It was one of Hogwarts' many forbidden duels, this one from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Malfoy sneered, "Scared, Potter?" But Harry wasn't. He was furious. And just like that, Serpensortia, a spell that launched a black serpent across the floor, opened a chapter in the long, unofficial history of dueling at Hogwarts. Outside the guidance of teachers, dueling at Hogwarts was technically banned. Any form of magical combat must be supervised by a qualified member of staff, as Professor McGonagall would sternly say. But for Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the real lessons in defense and spellcasting didn't come from textbooks or lectures. They came from experience, from reckless courage, from necessity. They knew that life, especially their lives, didn't follow the schedule of the Hogwarts timetable. Even as early as their first year, the trio became tangled in the need to fight back. Trolls in the dungeon weren't dispatched with quills and essays. It was Harry, with a wand gripped tightly in fear, shouting "Wingardium Leviosa" as Ron helped him defeat the 12-foot monster. That wasn't called a duel, but it certainly was a battle, unsanctioned, chaotic, and dangerous. And yet it was the first time the trio proved that bravery and action would always outweigh caution and rules. By 5th year, those early instincts had evolved into something much more deliberate. The creation of Dumbledore's army was, at its core, a rebellion, not just against the tyranny of Dolores Umbridge, but against the complacency of a magical world refusing to prepare for war. "We're not learning how to defend ourselves," Hermione had said, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with determination. "We're not learning anything." So they gathered in the room of requirement, the walls reshaping themselves into a dueling hall, training ground, sanctuary. Here, outside the law of Hogwarts, true learning began. Neville Longbottom, once a shy, forgetful boy, became one of the army's fiercest duelists. Under Harry's guidance, he went from fumbling his wand to casting stunning spells with confidence. "Expelliarmus!" he would cry again and again, practicing until his wrist ached and his spells finally hit with force. These duels weren't mock displays, and they were real. Wands were knocked from hands, blasts sent students sprawling, and yet every spell cast was a step toward survival, toward courage. Of course, the danger was real. No one knew this more than Hermione. During one session, Zacharias Smith doubted Harry's teachings. "You're not even a real teacher," he said. Before anyone could stop him, Harry responded with a quick flick of his wand, a silent, disarming charm that sent Smith's wand flying. It was a reminder these weren't games. These were the early rehearsals for the war to come, and those who took them lightly would be left behind. Even outside the room of requirement, duels found their way into the darker corners of Hogwarts. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the tension between Gryffindor and Slytherin reached its boiling point. One of the most shocking, unsupervised duels happened between Harry and Draco, not in secret, but suddenly, brutally, in a bathroom. The fight escalated quickly. Draco, cornered, raised his wand. Harry, enraged, shouted a spell he had found in the margins of the Half-Blood Prince's textbook. Sectum Sempra. The result was horrifying. Draco collapsed, bleeding, gasping. "It's for enemies," the book had warned, but Harry hadn't understood. Snape burst into the room moments later, face pale, hands urgent, as he muttered counter-curses to stop the bleeding. That moment was a turning point. It proved that even those who had fought Death Eaters, escaped dragons, and summoned Patronuses could be unprepared for the consequences of unsanctioned duels. Magic, when uncontrolled, could scar or kill. But the urge to duel never faded. Even after that trauma, Harry didn't stop defending himself. Nor did his friends. The battle against injustice and darkness didn't come in uniform. It came in late-night wand practices, in whispered passwords and locked doors, in students teaching students how to strike, block, and disarm. "He's not just teaching us spells," said Luna Lovegood during a late DA meeting. "He's teaching us how to fight." Not all duels ended in pain. Some forged bonds when Ron, jealous and bruised by his insecurities, abandoned Harry and Hermione during their hunt for Horcruxes. He returned months later, ready to face death to make things right. It was in a duel against the Locket's illusion, where he slashed through the haunting images Voldemort conjured. He faced not an opponent, but his own darkest thoughts. Sometimes the most important duels are the ones we fight within. The true test, however, came during the Battle of Hogwarts. There was no professor to guide them, no protective dome. It was all real. Students, barely 17, faced Death Eaters in the corridors where they once whispered about homework. Seamus Finnegan lit the wooden bridge ablaze to trap the enemy. Lavender Brown, Parvati Patil, even Cho Chang took up arms. Dueling was no longer rebellion. It was war. It was survival. One of the most memorable moments came when Professor McGonagall, dueling like a general, stood beside her students and fought like one of them. "I've always wanted to use that spell," she smiled after animating the suits of armor to defend the school. But the true heart of the battle belonged to the students. It was Ginny Weasley casting hexes with fierce precision. It was Fred and George dueling side by side. It was Colin Creevey, too young to even be there, who paid the price. In those final hours, rules dissolved. There was no more distinction between teacher and student, between authorized and forbidden. The duels in secret chambers, abandoned classrooms, and hidden rooms had prepared them for this. Every time Harry shouted, "Stupefy!" in the room of requirement, it was practice for when he would shout it at Voldemort himself. When Harry finally faced Voldemort in the Great Hall, there was silence. 2 wizards, 2 wands, no spectators, just one final duel. "Expelliarmus!" he cried, the spell he had always relied on, the one he had used in every unsanctioned duel from the very beginning. Voldemort's killing curse rebounded. The war ended. But the message remained: not all battles are fought on approved grounds. Even after the war, the memory of those duels lingered. In interviews and memoirs, many students would later say that the most important lessons they ever learned weren't in a classroom. They were in the room of requirement, in darkened hallways, in whispered training sessions. As Ernie Macmillan once said, those secret lessons with Harry, they saved our lives. They gave us the strength to stand. There is an old wizarding proverb: "Wand work learned in peace is forgotten in war." But wand work forged in the fire of need, that becomes unbreakable. The students of Hogwarts knew this. That's why they broke the rules, why they risked punishment. Because they understood something deeper than regulations. They understood that sometimes the duel is not a choice, it's a calling. Many forget that even Dumbledore himself once endorsed dueling, albeit discreetly. When he gave Harry the Marauder's map and the invisibility cloak, he wasn't just helping him sneak around, he was handing him the tools to train, to resist, to fight. Quietly, but effectively. Perhaps Dumbledore knew all along that the corridors of Hogwarts would become a battleground. Today, visitors to Hogwarts may stroll through those same corridors, unaware of the battles fought there. The statue outside the room of requirement doesn't say dueling club. It simply says they trained in the shadows so others could live in the light. A tribute to those who risked detention, injury, even expulsion for the sake of readiness. Of course, not every duel was noble, not every spell cast in anger was justified, but every unsupervised duel told a story of fear, of courage, of desperation, of loyalty. Whether it was Ginny hexing Zacharias for mocking her family, or Harry training DA members in defensive tactics, or Neville standing against his own housemates, each duel was a page in a larger narrative. It's easy to dismiss teenage duels as childish bravado, but the students of Hogwarts weren't just dueling for pride, they were preparing for something no child should have to face: war. And they met it, wand in hand, scars and all. As Harry once said, "We've got something worth fighting for." And so they did, whether allowed or not. Number 27. Secret use of portkeys. The wind was cold, the silence absolute. When Cedric Diggory touched the Triwizard Cup with Harry Potter, neither of them knew what lay ahead. One heartbeat later, the world spun. "It's a portkey!" Harry shouted as the blue flames licked their feet, lifting them off the ground. In that single instant, J.K. Rowling unveiled one of the most mysterious and unpredictable forms of magical transportation: the portkey. Introduced fully in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the portkey, a mundane object imbued with powerful enchantments, served as both a narrative pivot and a magical enigma. "It's the cup," Harry breathed. "It's a portkey." Cedric didn't have time to respond. They landed in a graveyard, not a triumphant podium, and within minutes Cedric was dead, killed by Peter Pettigrew on Voldemort's orders. The innocent cup, now an instrument of murder, began a legacy of fearful respect for portkeys that lingered throughout the rest of the saga. The beauty of a portkey lies in its deception: a battered boot, a rusty kettle, a simple silver cup, each capable of ripping wizards through space at unimaginable speed. And unlike apparition, which required intense focus and risked splinching, portkeys allowed for group travel and long-distance transport. But they were not toys, they were weapons, lifelines, traps, and often a last desperate hope. Dumbledore once said that magic was neither good nor evil. It depended on the user. This axiom applied perfectly to portkeys. When used within the Ministry of Magic's regulations, they were secure, practical, and tightly controlled. But when left in the hands of enemies, or rebellious students like Harry Potter, they could lead to unpredictable, even deadly, consequences. Ministry regulations required all portkeys to be registered. In Goblet of Fire, Ludo Bagman explained the rules when he orchestrated the mass arrival of Quidditch World Cup attendees. "We can't have hundreds of wizards apparating into a small area like that. It'd be bedlam." Portkeys, then, were a logistical solution to magical crowd control. But at Hogwarts, the rules were even stricter. Portkeys may not be used within Hogwarts grounds without the explicit permission of the headmaster, stated an internal school regulation Dumbledore often quoted. The castle, being a nexus of ancient protections, resisted unauthorized magical interference. Even Dobby the house elf had difficulty navigating it. Yet, time and again, Harry and his friends found themselves caught in situations that required them to bend, break, or completely ignore these rules. In Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Moody, created an unauthorized portkey, the Triwizard Cup, to transport Harry to Voldemort. This act alone bypassed every layer of magical security the school had in place. Dumbledore, upon realizing the truth, was furious. He turned the Triwizard Cup into a portkey, took you straight to Voldemort. It was a violation that shook Hogwarts to its core, and it revealed how easily portkeys could be corrupted. But not all portkeys were sinister. In Deathly Hallows, they became tools of survival. After infiltrating the Ministry of Magic under Polyjuice Potion disguises, Harry, Ron, and Hermione found themselves in immediate danger. With Yaxley, a Death Eater, pursuing them, Hermione cried out, "We can't apparate in here! The anti-apparition jinx!" And in a split-second decision, she used the enchanted bag she carried to produce a portkey. This was no official Ministry-issued object. It was Hermione's own doing, a charm learned in haste, practiced in secrecy. "The locket!" Ron gasped as they landed painfully in the forest outside London. But the use of portkeys in these situations had evolved. What had once been a regulated magical artifact had become a guerrilla tactic, a wartime escape route for a trio constantly on the run. The rules were gone now. The world was no longer safe, and portkeys were among the few ways to evade Death Eaters who could apparate and trace spells. In these moments, Hermione Granger became a quiet master of survival magic. She didn't just understand spells, she adapted them, twisted them, reshaped them for survival. Her creation and use of makeshift portkeys blurred the line between student and fugitive, between Hogwarts magic and battlefield innovation. One particular instance stands out. When the trio rescued the prisoners from Malfoy Manor, Dobby the house elf secured their escape with a portkey. "Dobby has come to rescue you," he squeaked as he produced a handful of rope. "Grab on!" There was no time for arguments. The prisoners, tortured and bleeding, seized the lifeline. Moments later, they were at Shell Cottage, and Dobby was dying in Harry's arms. This moment redefined the portkey. No longer just a magical curiosity, it became a symbol of sacrifice. Dobby had used it to defy his former masters, to break the chains of servitude. That portkey was freedom, but it came at a terrible cost. Even before Deathly Hallows, the implications of unregulated portkey use had been simmering in the background. Arthur Weasley once lamented the bureaucracy involved in their creation. We had to get special permission to use portkeys to bring in international visitors. The paperwork alone took weeks, yet Voldemort's followers bypassed all of this with ease. Their dark marks were trackers, their portkeys were cloaked in shadows. In contrast, Dumbledore understood the power of portkeys as strategic tools. When he escorted Harry from the Ministry after the grave events in the Department of Mysteries, he used Fawkes and his mastery of magical transport to get Harry out safely. But had Fawkes not been available, one suspects Dumbledore would have conjured a portkey on the spot, regardless of the rules. It's telling that Dumbledore himself used a portkey in Half-Blood Prince to take Harry to the seaside cave. He didn't ask permission from the Ministry. He didn't consult a committee. He placed his hand on Harry's shoulder and said, "Ready?" Moments later, they vanished. Dumbledore, the guardian of rules, had abandoned them in favor of necessity. Yet even in chaos, there was method. The Ministry had once employed portkeys as emergency evacuation tools. During Voldemort's rise to power, it was whispered that certain officials had portkeys sewn into their robes, enchanted cufflinks, rings or medallions, to flee if compromised. The Order of the Phoenix, too, used them. When the Dursleys were taken into protection, and when members like Kingsley Shacklebolt needed to move covertly between safe houses, portkeys became their silent allies. The magic behind the portkey enchantment, Portus, is rarely described in detail, perhaps intentionally. Hermione once said, "It's extremely advanced. You have to be precise with the destination and time. It's not just a matter of saying the incantation, like apparition." It demanded discipline. A portkey gone wrong could leave a wizard stranded in a void, caught between places. In the final battle at Hogwarts, there's no recorded use of portkeys. Why? Because the castle, under siege and layered in enchantments, likely rendered them impossible. Hogwarts resisted unauthorized magic. It always had. This, too, made portkeys tools of strategy, not reflex. They couldn't be used on a whim in sacred places. Still, one wonders, had the trio prepared more portkeys in advance? Could they have saved Fred Weasley? Could Remus, Lupin, and Tonks have lived? It's a cruel game of what-ifs, but it underscores the tantalizing potential of this transport, how it could alter fate with a single touch. Ultimately, portkeys are a narrative metaphor. They represent the idea that any object, no matter how ordinary, can become a vessel for extraordinary change. A boot becomes a passage, a cup becomes a curse, a rope becomes a final act of love. The rules governing them are like the rules governing the wizarding world itself, precise, ancient, and breakable. But no one broke them quite like Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Their use of portkeys mirrors their larger journey, defying structure, trusting instincts, seizing the tools around them not for glory, but survival. In a world where the Ministry's grip had grown weak and Hogwarts could no longer shield them, they made their own rules. "Grab it!" Ron shouted during one escape. "Now!" They didn't think. They acted. That was their magic. The portkeys spun again, colour drained from their faces, the world a blur. And when they landed, bruised and gasping for breath, they were alive. Each time they touched one, they stepped into uncertainty, but they also stepped into choice. And in the end, isn't that what defines a wizard? Not the wand, not the spell, but the will to reach out, grab the unknown, and trust that where you land is where you were meant to be. Number 28. Forging school documents. Of all the cunning deeds carried out at Hogwarts, few are as brazen and curiously overlooked as the forgery Hermione Granger and Harry Potter committed during their second year. The crime was clear, falsifying a school document to access a restricted section of the library. But what elevates this moment from a mere prank to an act of academic fraud is the forged signature of none other than Gilderoy Lockhart, one of the school's own professors, a signature that Lockhart himself had not penned, nor had he even been aware of. The restricted section of the Hogwarts library is not just a name, it is a warning, filled with books so dangerous, so twisted in their content, that only those with teachers' permission may enter. And yet, within days of conceiving their plan to brew the polyjuice potion, Hermione was already strategizing a way in. "I think we ought to get cracking on the polyjuice potion," she said, with that familiar urgency in her voice. "It'll take about a month to make." The only catch? The recipe was hidden behind a lock that could only be opened with deceit. Hermione, the ever-diligent student, knew rules like the back of her hand, and she broke them anyway. That is what makes the moment so startling. She had always been the embodiment of order, the champion of teachers' trust, but this time she crossed the line from bending rules to outright violating them. And she didn't do it alone. The trio decided to steal into the library under the pretense of legitimacy. "We'll need to get a teacher's signature," Hermione had said, but she didn't mean they'd ask. She meant they'd take. Lockhart, with his flamboyant flair and notorious self-absorption, proved an easy target. "Professor Lockhart will sign anything if it's to do with him," Hermione had smirked. And with that, the plan was born, not just to enter the restricted section, but to fabricate permission to do so. They forged the note. It was a simple thing, a single parchment with a forged sentence and a looped, curly signature. Hermione mimicked Lockhart's handwriting well enough that Madame Pince, the librarian, didn't question it. "Very well," she had sniffed, eyes narrowed, before handing over the thick, sinister-looking book, Moste Potente Potions. Just like that, the crime was committed. No alarms, no spells to detect deception, just trust, betrayed. Think about what this means in a Muggle context. Falsifying a school document, especially one involving a teacher's signature, is grounds for immediate suspension or expulsion. It is fraud, plain and simple. Yet in the enchanted halls of Hogwarts, where staircases move and ghosts haunt lavatories, this high-level academic forgery went unpunished. Lockhart, for his part, remained clueless, which is perhaps the most absurd element of this entire escapade. Here was a teacher so enamored with his own image that he didn't even notice his signature being used for access to forbidden magical content. "Ah, yes, Hermione," he'd say later, basking in the flattery she so artfully supplied, always so eager to learn. But Lockhart's ignorance doesn't erase the facts. A professor's signature was faked to access dangerous information. The polyjuice potion recipe itself, found in Moste Potente Potions, is a complex and volatile piece of magic. It involves the plucking of human hair, the brewing of volatile substances, and, most disturbingly, the transformation of a witch or wizard into someone else entirely. The very purpose of this potion is deception, and that was precisely the goal. Harry, Ron, and Hermione didn't want to explore the restricted section for curiosity or research. They wanted to impersonate fellow students, specifically Draco Malfoy's cronies, Crabbe and Goyle, to extract information from him. It was espionage, it was identity theft, and it was premeditated. Harry, under the influence of the potion, would lumber around the Slytherin common room with Goyle's voice and face. Hermione, who had planned to transform into Millicent Bulstrode, suffered a misfire, accidentally using a cat's hair, and partially transforming into a feline. The risk was enormous, the ethical lines blurred, and none of it would have been possible without that one forged note. What's even more shocking is the moral inconsistency within the Hogwarts staff's reactions. Other students have faced harsher penalties for far less. In their first year, Harry, Hermione, Neville and Draco lost house points for being out of bed, but here, an act that broke both legal and magical codes went entirely undiscussed. Was it because Dumbledore turned a blind eye, or because the school's chaotic energy simply absorbed the wrongdoing without notice? Madam Pince, the gatekeeper of the restricted section, didn't question Lockhart's signature. This alone speaks volumes about Hogwarts' lack of procedural safeguards. In the Muggle world, signatures are verified, permissions are logged, but at Hogwarts, a 12-year-old with good penmanship could outsmart the entire system. Hermione's crime is especially rich in irony. She would go on to become a prominent advocate for justice and structure within the Ministry of Magic, but her early academic life was sprinkled with defiance. The girl who would one day write legislation once forged a signature to access illegal transformation magic. The same girl who reported Rita Skeeter for unregistered animagus status once impersonated another student using hair plucked without consent. This moment in the Chamber of Secrets isn't isolated. It is part of a larger pattern where the rules at Hogwarts seem to exist more for aesthetic than enforcement. Consider the Marauder's map, which openly displays everyone's location on the grounds. It's a breach of privacy no headmaster ever attempts to correct. Or the Time Turner, handed to Hermione in her third year with minimal oversight, allowing her to manipulate time itself. And yet, despite these larger infractions, the forgery stands out. Not because of its magnitude, but because of its intention. Harry and Hermione didn't stumble into trouble. They planned it. They deceived a teacher, duped a librarian, and read a book filled with such dark enchantments that its pages whispered of curses and bone removal spells. The Polyjuice Potion is a complicated and challenging potion, the book warned. Attempting it without proper supervision is strongly discouraged. They did it anyway. Ron, for once, was hesitant. He didn't share the same thirst for reckless research, and he expressed concern about the risks. But as usual, the trio moved forward, bonded by the logic that the ends justified the means. They were trying to stop the heir of Slytherin, after all. In their minds, this justified impersonation and forgery. It was a noble mission dressed in shadowy acts. What the books never quite address is the psychological burden this must have placed on Hermione. Unlike Harry and Ron, who often acted on impulse, Hermione calculated everything, and she knew the weight of what she was doing. It must have eaten at her, even if she didn't show it. She was the one who physically forged the signature, after all. It was her handwriting, her scheme. One could even argue this incident marked a turning point for Hermione. From that moment, she no longer played merely by the rules. She became someone who understood when to bend them, when to break them. She used legal logic when it suited her, but embraced rule-breaking when the greater good demanded it. It was the start of her dual identity, the by-the-book genius and the rebellious strategist. The implications of this moment ripple outward. Had they been caught, what would the punishment have been? Expulsion, wand snapping, detention with Filch for the rest of the term? Perhaps nothing at all, given the way authority in Hogwarts often swayed with the winds of drama. But still, the risk was real. This tale also reveals something about the culture of Hogwarts itself. It's a school where students are expected to fend for themselves, to investigate, to act like young adults long before they are ready. The adults, meanwhile, often remain oblivious or willfully ignorant. In this context, Hermione's forgery was not an aberration, it was survival. The irony is profound. Hermione, a rule follower to her core, committed one of the clearest administrative crimes a student could, and she got away with it. The signature never came up again. Lockhart never noticed. Madam Pince never questioned it. And Dumbledore? He likely knew, he always knew, but let it slide, perhaps believing that learning sometimes grows best in the cracks of discipline. When readers look back at this chapter in the Chamber of Secrets, they often remember the Polyjuice mishaps, the Slytherin common room, or the horror of Hermione's partial transformation into a cat. But few linger on the first step that made it all possible, a forged signature written with deliberate intent by a second-year student who knew better. In any other school, magical or not, this would have been a scandal. In Hogwarts, it was just Tuesday. Number 29, secret use of legilimency. It began as a whisper in the back of his mind, a feeling more than a thought, images that were not his own, anger that did not belong to him, and visions that pierced through sleep like shards of ice. Harry Potter, though barely 16, had become an unwitting vessel for something ancient and dark. Legilimency, the magical ability to delve into another's mind, had wrapped itself around him like a parasite. He had not learned it through books or formal instruction. Instead, it had found him through the cursed link that connected his soul to Lord Voldemort's, a connection neither of them had asked for, yet both learned to exploit. "Did you see it again?" Hermione's voice had trembled when she asked, clutching her books as if logic could shield her from prophecy. Harry had nodded vaguely, unwilling to speak the full truth. He had seen something again. A corridor, a snake, a man screaming, but what he did not say was that he felt the snake's hunger. He felt the pleasure in the attack, and perhaps most terrifying of all, he had started to anticipate these visions, not to fear them. He used them. Dumbledore, of course, had warned him. "The connection is dangerous," he had said in Order of the Phoenix, his face grave beneath the candlelight. "You must close your mind." Yet Harry, left alone in a world that asked too much and offered too little, found himself leaning into the gift. Or was it a curse? Occlumency lessons with Snape were failures by design, marked by hostility, bitterness, and sabotage. And while Snape accused him of laziness, Harry quietly nurtured the visions Voldemort inadvertently fed him, storing them like secrets in the drawer of a private investigator. There was a moment, clear as the glint of a sword, when Harry realized the power he possessed. It was during his 5th year, just after Mr. Weasley was attacked by Nagini in the Department of Mysteries. Harry's vision had saved Arthur's life, and though Dumbledore reacted swiftly, he also recoiled from Harry, as if the boy carried a contamination. In that coldness, Harry made a decision. If he couldn't rely on adults to trust him, he would trust himself. And so he watched, he listened, he entered. He never said the word legilimens. He didn't have to. The act was not performed with a wand pointed between the eyes or a cry in Latin. It came in dreams and waking flashes, in sudden moods and inexplicable memories, a screaming child, a soaring sense of triumph, a craving for blood. Harry learned to tell when Voldemort was near or active, not just by the scar's pain, but by the thoughts not his own that clouded his mind. He used this to predict, to maneuver, but he also hid it. "Why didn't you tell us?" Hermione demanded after the vision of the snake, after the chaos in the Ministry, after Sirius's death. "You could have." But Harry didn't answer, because what could he say? That he hadn't wanted Dumbledore involved, that he needed to follow the vision himself, that deep down, part of him liked having a secret tool the others didn't understand. He could not admit the truth even to himself. The line between tool and temptation grew thinner as the war advanced. Harry began to see more than Voldemort's actions. He sensed his emotions, his reactions, and most dangerously his strategies. When Voldemort sought Gregorovitch, the Wandmaker, Harry saw the desperation. When Voldemort murdered a German family in search of the Elder Wand, Harry felt the coldness in his chest. And yet he continued to hide these visions, even from his closest allies. Ron was the first to notice the changes. "You go quiet?" he said one night in the tent during their Horcrux hunt. "You stare at nothing for hours." But Harry brushed it off. "Just thinking." And though Ron accepted it, Hermione looked at him too long, too hard. She knew better. She always did. Yet even she could not pry open the vault that was Harry's mind, not when he chose to keep it closed. At Malfoy Manor, As the trio were captured and tortured, Harry felt something, Voldemort's ecstasy at possessing the Elder Wand. The timing was exact, the emotional clarity surgical. He told no one, not then, only later, when facts required it. And even then, not everything. Because by then, Harry had come to understand that legilimency was more than a connection. It was a weapon, a compass, a means to see what no one else could. And he was using it. The most chilling moment came in Deathly Hallows when Voldemort's rage over the theft of Hufflepuff's cup boiled inside Harry's mind. "He knows," Harry had whispered in the dead of night. But how did he know? Because Harry had known, because Harry had seen it, felt it, as if it were his own treasure being taken. The vision had come unbidden but not unwanted. With every Horcrux, every step closer to Voldemort's psyche, Harry was not just invading the Dark Lord's mind, he was absorbing it. Somewhere, somehow, Dumbledore must have guessed. His silence in the final letter to Harry, revealed through the pensive, spoke volumes. He gave instructions, he left tools. But he never said, "Use the visions," nor did he say, "Don't." He trusted Harry. Perhaps too much. He gambled that the boy's heart was strong enough to resist the allure of darkness, even while walking its edge. He won that gamble, but not without cost. Because what was legilimency, if not the ultimate violation of privacy? A spell designed to extract truth, to strip away pretense, to dissect the soul. For a 16-year-old boy to wield such power, secretly, instinctively, without restraint, was dangerous. It was not just unethical, it was terrifying. And yet Harry never apologized, he never confessed, because in his mind it was always for the greater good. "I had to know," Harry had said to Ron after learning Voldemort's location in the Forbidden Forest. "It was the only way." But was it? Or had he come to depend on the visions? Had he, in some twisted sense, become addicted to that window into another man's mind? A man who, once, had been part of him? In the end, it was not a duel of spells that defeated Voldemort. It was knowledge, anticipation, understanding. Harry knew his enemy's fears, his weaknesses, his obsessions, not because he read them in books, but because he lived them, felt them, took them into himself, and did not look away. That, more than any one movement, was his secret magic. He had used legilimency without ever truly being taught. He had wielded it not as a spell, but as an instinct. And in doing so, he had broken a boundary most wizards feared to cross. He had seen what lay behind the mask of the Dark Lord, not as a hero peering into darkness, but as a shadow among shadows, using the very tools of the enemy to bring about his end. No teacher had sanctioned this, no mentor had guided his hand. He made that choice alone. And perhaps that is why no punishment ever followed, because to punish Harry for this was to acknowledge that the system had failed him, that Dumbledore had failed him, that the war had twisted even the noblest into soldiers willing to sacrifice their purity for survival. And yet even after victory the connection did not fully fade. The scar no longer burned, yes, but the memories remained, the taste of Voldemort's rage, the pull of his thoughts. It lingered. Harry never spoke of it, not to Ginny, not to Hermione, not even to Ron. It became a part of him, filed away like a weapon, stored for a future that would never come. Years later, as an Auror, Harry faced questions he could not answer. How did he know where to go, who to trust, when to strike? "A hunch," he would say. But it was more. It was a whisper in the mind, a shadow behind the eyes. It was the same forbidden magic he had once denied, then embraced, then buried. But it had never truly left him. There is a moment in Half-Blood Prince when Dumbledore says, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love." And it is true. That love, that purity, had been Harry's shield, but he had also used fire to fight fire. He had used legilimency secretly and without consent. He had done what others feared, and he had won. In the final reckoning, the wizarding world hailed him as a hero. But in quiet rooms, in unspoken thoughts, Harry sometimes wondered if they would still call him that, if they knew the whole truth, if they knew what he had seen, if they knew what he had done. Number 30. Aiding a fugitive prisoner. The night Sirius Black vanished from the astronomy tower, taking flight upon the back of the hippogriff Buckbeak, was more than just a dramatic moment in the annals of Hogwarts history. It was a turning point not only for the infamous fugitive from Azkaban, but for 3 students who, from that moment on, were no longer simply schoolchildren. They had crossed a threshold, becoming participants in a secret rebellion against a corrupt system. Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley helped a convicted criminal escape justice. The morality behind their choice was complex, the legality even murkier. Sirius Black had been sentenced to Azkaban without trial. This in itself is a grievous miscarriage of justice in any legal framework. In the wizarding world, where truth-telling spells, memory examinations, and magical surveillance exist, the lack of due process in his case is nothing short of horrifying. Yet regardless of the injustice, Black was still officially a fugitive. After the events of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when he escapes on Buckbeak with Harry and Hermione's help, the Ministry reaffirms his status as a wanted man. The law, flawed or not, is clear. Aiding and abetting a fugitive is a criminal act. By the time we reach Order of the Phoenix, the Golden Trio has graduated from passive accomplices to active participants in Sirius's continued evasion of capture. They don't merely stay silent about his location. They communicate with him, they bring him news, they involve him in their plans. Sirius lives at 12 Grimmauld Place, the ancestral home of the Black family, and now headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix. Its location is protected by the Fidelius charm with Albus Dumbledore as secret keeper, a level of magical concealment so strong it might as well be a magical witness protection program. But even with such measures, the trio's involvement becomes deeply personal. Harry possesses a magical mirror, a twin-to-one Sirius carries, which allows them to speak across distances without alerting anyone. The device is introduced subtly, but its implications are massive. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius tells Harry, "Use it if you need me, all right? Just speak my name into it and you'll see my face." This mirror becomes a symbol of their clandestine link, a lifeline that bypasses both school authorities and the Ministry. It's not used as frequently as it could be, but the very fact that such a channel exists between a Hogwarts student and a fugitive is telling. Ron and Hermione, meanwhile, serve as co-conspirators. Their loyalty to Harry extends to Sirius by proxy. In Grimmauld Place, they speak with Sirius openly, sometimes advising him to stay hidden, sometimes expressing concern about his growing recklessness. At one point, Hermione says to him, "You're not doing anybody any good by getting yourself arrested." She is aware, intimately, of the stakes involved. She understands that harbouring Sirius is illegal. And yet she continues. Ron, though less vocal, follows suit. Not once does he suggest they turn Sirius in. The moral compass of the trio has shifted. Law is no longer their guide. Justice is. And yet justice in the magical world is a malleable thing. The Ministry of Magic under Cornelius Fudge has become more of a propaganda machine than a judicial institution. Laws are twisted to suit political ends. Truth is suppressed. In this atmosphere, the trio's decision to protect Sirius starts to feel less like a crime and more like a necessity. But it is still a crime. Let us be clear, they are withholding crucial information from law enforcement, harbouring a known fugitive, and aiding in his evasion. If the situation were reversed, if someone were hiding Bellatrix Lestrange, there would be no mercy. Imagine, for a moment, that these actions had occurred in the Muggle world. 3 teenagers, barely 15, assisting a man who escaped from a high-security prison, hiding him in a family home, contacting him regularly, and feeding him information. The consequences would be swift and severe. Parents would be implicated, charges would be filed, the press would have a field day. And yet in the wizarding world there is only silence, no repercussions for Harry, Ron, or Hermione. Why? Because Sirius is one of the good guys. That's the truth of it. The books frame him as a victim, unjustly imprisoned, fiercely loyal, flawed but fundamentally noble. And he is. But the law doesn't distinguish between noble and ignoble fugitives. Not in theory. The trio's actions only go unpunished because of the narrative lens through which we view them. If the same had been done for a Death Eater, the tone would be very different. Consider the implications for the other students at Hogwarts. What message does it send that the Ministry is so easily undermined, that students acting independently can harbour a fugitive and escape all consequences? It's a dangerous precedent. Of course, one might argue that in a time of tyranny, under an unjust regime, civil disobedience is not only acceptable but morally necessary. That argument holds weight, but it's one thing to defy an unjust system. It's another to involve children in crimes without their full understanding of the risks. Harry, of course, is different. His bond with Sirius goes beyond logic. Sirius is the closest thing he has to family. Their connection is emotional, desperate, and beautiful in its own right. When Harry defies Umbridge's orders and sneaks into her office to contact Sirius through the Flu network, he does so with a reckless sense of urgency. The scene is fraught with tension. Sirius appears fleetingly in the flames. "You're a lot like James," he says, smiling sadly, just before he's interrupted and the connection is severed. In that moment, Harry isn't helping a criminal. He's talking to his godfather. The law be damned, and yet the law is not damned. It's ignored. Conveniently, selectively. The Order of the Phoenix itself is an organization operating in defiance of the Ministry. Their very existence is an act of rebellion. That Harry, Ron, and Hermione become entwined with them is both inevitable and dangerous. It blurs the lines between right and wrong, legal and illegal. Their entire fifth year is defined by secret meetings, rule-breaking, and underground movements. Sirius's situation is merely the most obvious example of their descent into vigilante ethics. Let us also not forget the portrait of Sirius's mother, wall-eyed, hateful, shrieking curses from the wall of Grimmauld Place. This grotesque reminder of Sirius's origins makes his plight even more tragic. He is not only a prisoner of the Ministry, but of his past, his family, his house. And the trio, especially Harry, becomes his emotional anchor. They don't just help him hide, they give him a reason to stay hidden. They remind him what he's fighting for. But Sirius does not cope well with confinement. As the months pass, his behavior becomes erratic. He grows bitter, reckless, and increasingly willing to risk exposure. When Harry begins having visions of the Department of Mysteries, it is Sirius who encourages him to act. And when the false vision of Sirius being tortured lures Harry into breaking into the Ministry, the circle is complete. A fugitive who once fled for freedom now becomes the bait in a trap that leads to his death. It is a brutal irony. The trio protects Sirius for years, shields him from the world, and when he finally steps into the light again, it costs him his life. His death is sudden, violent, and deeply unfair. Bellatrix Lestrange, his own cousin, strikes him with a curse that sends him falling through the veil in the Department of Mysteries. No trial, no redemption, no closure. And what of the aftermath? The Ministry begins to acknowledge the return of Voldemort. The public starts to see the cracks in their previously rigid worldview. But still no one addresses the fact that 3 students actively harbored a fugitive. Not a single teacher reprimands them, not a single official investigates their role. The system that failed to protect Sirius also fails to hold anyone accountable for the choices made in the shadows. This silence speaks volumes. It reflects a broader problem in the wizarding world, the inconsistency of its justice. When laws are enforced only when convenient, when punishment is doled out selectively, the law itself loses meaning, and yet within this chaos something else is born, a sense of personal responsibility. The trio may have broken laws, but they did so knowingly, accepting the risk. They chose loyalty over legality, love over rules, and perhaps in a world as broken as theirs, that's the only choice that matters. Still, one wonders what would have happened had they been caught. Would Dumbledore have intervened? Would the Wizengamot have prosecuted them? Would the press have crucified them? The questions linger, unanswered, echoing like footsteps in the dark halls of the Ministry. Sirius Black remains to this day a symbol of both defiance and tragedy. The trio's involvement in his life is one of the most morally complex threads in the series. It challenges the reader to consider, when is it right to break the law? And when does loyalty cross the line into complicity? There are no easy answers. Only the memory of a man who laughed too loudly, loved too fiercely, and died too soon. And the memory of 3 young friends who, in helping him hide, discovered that growing up sometimes means breaking the rules, no matter the cost.